Well, happy holidays, everyone. One of the great pleasures of our work here at City Forest Credits is talking to people like you all over the country. And one thing that always comes through is the dedication that you all have. The urban forest people, you know, you love trees, you love people, you love communities, you love all the many benefits that you see the trees bring. And it's just a pleasure to talk with you all throughout the country. My older brother, some of you may have worked with, is Greg McPherson. He's a recently retired scientist with the Forest Service. And he told me over many years that one of the best things about his job was just working with people like you. Now, there's one thing, however, that urban forest people don't have enough of, and that's funding. There never seems to be enough work to advance, enough money to advance your work. So we started with a very targeted goal of trying to connect urban forest organizations locally with a new funding source and to help provide some climate leadership for local tree organizations. And we're a national nonprofit organization. So again, we didn't do this to become rich. We did this to help you generate more funding to advance your work. And the goal, again, is to empower you to generate credits and also empower companies who may be buying carbon credits in developing countries or in faraway places, have them make investments in their own backyards in what we regard as local climate action. Now, the problems, I'm preaching to the choir. I know you know the problems, quite significant tree loss almost everywhere. Urbanization of the population, which puts pressure on the trees, clearly inequitable distribution and maintenance of trees, and then the public funding just doesn't keep up. And you know, the public funding is no one's fault per se. It's that urban forestry has traditionally been funded primarily through cities. And when cities record trees on their books, they record them as an expense. So all the many asset values of trees that you all are aware of, they never appear on city budgets. All they see is the expense. And then that generally gets ranked below all the many human service needs. The benefits of trees, you're all well aware of those. So here's the opportunity, which is to have a local carbon credit, to have it done through a national carbon standard, and to have really good science on quantification with a standardized approach. So let's just start kind of at the beginning. We spent our really first couple years developing carbon protocols, and that's the fancy phrase for essentially a rule book. These are the documents that contain the rules that you would have to follow if you want to do a carbon project. And those protocols were drafted by a working group of leading urban forest scientists, urban forest professionals in lots of different sectors, and sectors also that are sometimes not represented in urban forestry, like land trusts, like watersheds, like some utilities. And so these rule books contain essentially rules on location, on ownership of the site and the credit, on quantification, on verification, on the many things you have to have a carbon project. Now, significantly, and these are things that sometimes scare urban forest people, for a planting project, you need to make a 26-year commitment to the trees. I'll talk about that a little bit more soon. And we also have a preservation protocol, which is preserving forested stands of trees. And those require a 40 or 100-year commitment. There are two different protocols for that. So you can do a 40-year project or a 100-year project. And I'll give you a little bit more information on that, although I suspect that most of you are interested more in the planting side than the preservation side. Oftentimes, land trusts and conservancy organizations focus on preservation, and it has been an interesting discovery that the land trust community doesn't always talk to the urban forest community, which is a shame because there are a lot of commonalities. So here's a quick slide where I don't mean to go through this point by point, but I wanted to put some detail here in case any of you want to look up the presentation after the fact. The point here really is that People hear urban forestry and they sometimes think, oh, that means carbon credits only in the downtown core. Well, that's not the case. We have a definition of urban that includes the urban area per the Census Bureau maps. And those urban areas go well beyond the downtown core, past the suburbs, in some cases even toward what you might think of as rural. We also include planning areas for metropolitan planning agencies or councils. And sometimes those are much larger areas that comprise whole metro areas. So in Chicago, just to take one example, the Chicago Municipal Agency for Planning does planning for the 7-county Chicago metro area. So that area is all eligible under our protocol. So carbon credits. Our feeling at the start was that the urban credits would be probably the best possible credit you could imagine. And there's several reasons for that. One is in urban forestry, what you have are mostly nonprofit organizations and local governments that are doing the tree work. By that, I mean the planting and the preservation. And a lot of it is done on public property. So what you have essentially is a resource that is being planted oftentimes on public property for a public benefit as a public resource. And it's being done by a nonprofit or by a local government so that the revenues coming from the carbon credits are essentially put right back into more trees or maintaining the trees that are planted or preserved. That's very different than the larger carbon world, where the private landowners who are the owners of the projects are usually in it for money. So those might be industrial carbon projects. They might be, rural forest projects where the owners oftentimes are private timber owners. And generally, those other larger carbon projects are developed by for-profit carbon developers. So again, very different with urban forestry. So the whole structure of urban forestry is designed to have a public resource implemented by essentially public interest entities. And then on the second side, you have the urban trees that deliver all these benefits. Chiefly, we've got the ecosystem values on this slide. So a carbon credit is a metric ton of CO2 that's quantified now, and we can quantify that down to the individual tree. We can also quantify rainfall interception, air quality, and energy savings. And our lead scientist on the urban side is my older brother, Greg McPherson. He was also the lead scientist on carbon efforts in California. Those produced protocols, but the protocols were not workable and have never been used. That's essentially why we started the work at City Forest Credits. So you have these very valuable and quantifiable ecosystem values that are part of the urban forest credit. You should note, we don't sell, or projects don't sell, the ecosystem values separately from the carbon credit, but we bundle all these in to show how valuable the carbon credit is. And then, of course, we have the social impacts from urban trees, which are tremendous. And we've spent a lot of time to develop essentially a reporting framework. We've developed essentially a taxonomy, if you will, of 30 different impacts and indicators from both social equity and human health impacts of urban tree projects. So these are project scale impacts, not like a mapping impact, but it's project scale reporting that allows you to report the social impacts of your projects and have those all mapped through to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the whole goal here is to create a credit that is really valuable. It's not going to try to compete on price with a cheap rural forest credit. It's its own unique and highly valuable credit. Here's just a quick slide on our impact, our CFC, City Forest Credits organizational impact. This is only through 2021, so it doesn't capture 2022. 3.1 million delivered to local projects, trees planted. You can see the number of projects, the acres preserved. This is really a year old now, but just gives a quick snapshot of some of our impacts. We now have about 38 carbon projects going all across the country. Each one of these, just like the work that you all do, they have their own stories, their own people, their own communities, their own climate, their own pressures, their own challenges. And I wish there were time to tell 38 different stories, but we clearly don't have time for that. I have a couple slides for you now just to give you kind of the overview. And this is, again, quick. There's much more information for you. Some of those will be in the chat under resources, and then we will have a list of resources posted after the webinar as well. There's also our website, and our team is happy to talk to you as well. So here's a quick slide, again, overview on the process. So first step is usually explore the project with us. We would confirm eligibility, make sure that you meet all the basic requirements, and make sure that it's a project that is worth doing from a carbon point of view. Second step is you have to sign a legal agreement with City Forest Credits to commit to the project, and you have to complete all of the documentation required by the protocol. That includes quantification of the carbon. And again, we'll talk more about that. Step 3 is we review all the documentation, we validate all that documentation, and then we submit it to a third-party verifier who reviews it to make sure that everything is accurate. Step 4, then we issue credits to you, to the project operators. And the project operators sell the credits to the buyers. You also have to submit monitoring reports at intervals depending on the type of project over the project duration. So you don't just get the credits and then check out of a project. You do have to make a long-term commitment to the project. That is intimidating to some organizations. We understand completely. The carbon world does require that kind of long-term commitment. We like to think of it in a positive slant as this is a really high-quality project because it's going to deliver long-term accountability and longevity. Here's another infographic that just tells the story in a slightly different way. So let's put you all at the center of this infographic. Let's assume you're a local operator of a project. If you follow that slide to the left from the local operator over to City Forest Credits, you'll see it says you plant or protect trees and you follow our protocols. Then going up above City Forest Credits, there's an arrow back to the local operator. We issue the credits to you. We monitor for compliance with the protocol. You then sell credits to the buyer. The buyer's funds flow directly to you. We're not in between you and the buyer on the money. We charge fees to you that you pay out of the proceeds of the sale. And again, we're a nonprofit organization, so our goal is to deliver as much money to you as possible. The outcomes ultimately, the buyer offsets their carbon emissions or uses the credits in whatever way they want. You invest those trees invest your carbon revenue into trees and community. So your question might be, who's going to buy these credits? Well, we have tried to position these credits from the start as premium credits. They're not high volume credits. So these projects are not 20,000 acres of rural forest. And we position them to command a high price. So again, low volume, really valuable though, and expensive. Credits have been purchased so far and projects have been funded by the entities you see here, City of Austin, PayPal, local buyers in various cases. And then in 2021, we did something that we had wanted to do from the beginning, which is we felt like there were enough projects being issued nationally that all of the projects across the nation could aggregate their credits into one bundle, one kind of aggregated portfolio of projects and credits. And that bundle was described in an RFP or a request for proposal that went out to kind of a select group of potential buyers. And as it turned out, there were multiple buyers engaged. That whole bundle sold in one transaction to one buyer. Each project got all the revenue that was equal to its own credited carbon storage. So each project has to quantify its own carbon. That is included in the sale. The proceeds get distributed to each project per its carbon credits. was really wonderful to see because the price paid was quite high. The projects netted $34 a ton. And just to put that in some context, a rural forest credit in 2021 those were selling between 12 and about 19. So the urban credits got about double the value of a rural forest credit. This made a bit of a splash in the carbon press because it's a specialty product in the carbon market, really. And it was reported out as paying 45 a ton. Actually, the net to the projects, the buyer actually paid $36 a ton. The fee to the representative for the projects was $2 a ton approximately, so they netted $34 a ton, and then they paid our fees. So here's a quick slide about what is possible, and we put this up because we are happy to work with individual projects. We are also happy to work and think on a larger scale, which would be a regional scale. So we launched in March of 2021 the Chicago Region Carbon Program. And one of the key elements there is an organization called the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, and that's CRTI in this slide. CRTI is an umbrella organization. They know the landscape, they know all the stakeholders in the whole region. So they're able to essentially put together a regional program there, work with us, where they and City Forest Credits talk to many local organizations. In their case, we launched with a webinar with 80 different organizations in the Chicago region on the webinar. And then the local project implementers, so these are the local groups in the Chicago region, decide whether they want to participate or not. They prepare an application, submit their project info, goes to CRTI and to City Forest Credits. We then review, validate, obtain third-party verification, and issue the credits. The first two pilots under that, which were in 2021, actually started in 2020, sold their credits in that national sale. And then we have 2022 projects that are actually now concluding their crediting, about to receive their credits, and those will be in the bundle of 2022 credits that is going to go out on an RFP soon. Now, I know that you'll hear from Dan, and Dan is one of you, so I think he's going to have some important information from you on what it's like to actually implement a project. But here's a couple quick slides just to show you some examples. So this is one in Pittsburgh. This is a preservation project, so it's a land trust, the Allegheny Land Trust. And they found a 124-acre parcel that was threatened with imminent development. It was zoned for a subdivision, basically. And they came in and credited this and sold their credits to help them close the funding gap so they could acquire this property. They actually had a little bit left over that they want to use toward maintenance of the property. This project actually was rated. There have now, in the last couple of years, some firms have developed that will rate carbon projects. And they do that because as the carbon market has grown, some of the buyers want some third-party indication of whether this is a really good project or not. And we didn't know about this rating happening. One of the buyers commissioned it, but we were very happy to see that it received the highest tier grade in the rating scale for this ratings firm. So very nice to see, you know, not only all the many benefits, but a high quality rating in terms of a carbon project. Quick slide on preservation. And again, I know this may not speak to many of you, but the one issue is size. We currently don't work with projects smaller than 15 acres. And that's just a scale issue and capacity issue. The ownership, you always have to be careful about ownership. So in this case, the person who is the project operator doing the project, they either have to own the land or they have to have the right from the owner to receive the credits. And again, much more to say about that, but that's just a quick note. Prior to the preservation of the property, the zoning must allow a non-forest use. In other words, the trees are not protected prior to the carbon project. And then you have to demonstrate a threat of loss. You can do that through 3 different ways. One is to show that there are surrounding 30% of the perimeter of the property is surrounded by an improved or developed use, or that the property is sold or assessed for 8,000 acre or more. And that price is just an indication that development pressure is very strong because timberland is generally about 2,000 an acre. And then the project action requires recording an easement, a covenant, or a deed restriction that specifically protects the trees for 40 years. And of course, you have to monitor the project for those 40 years. So on the planning side, Dan will talk more. This is just a quick slide about one of the early projects. Well, Trees Forever is based in Des Moines and Iowa. So they did a project in Des Moines early. This is I think their 3rd project, or maybe the 2020 was their 2nd project. Microsoft has funded the implementation of these projects and helped them launch a workforce training as part of it. And this project is what you might recognize as kind of a classic street tree, park tree planting. So they did launch a workforce training program. They developed youth engagement through that and planted in a number of neighborhoods, including under-resourced neighborhoods. Now, let's just talk about money a little bit. Here's one slide, and again, we're on a 20-minute intro. I don't have time to go over this in detail, but here's a slide that shows an example of one of the Chicago planting projects. So they planted 1,114 trees. You can see that on the left side. That is projected to store 2,864 tons of carbon. That's CO2, and that's minus various deductions like mortality deductions and there are a few other deductions too, but that's the forecasted creditable carbon storage. Now, in the planning projects, credits are issued at these intervals. Year 1 is 10% of the credits. Year 4 is 30%. Year 6 is 30%. Year 14 is 10%. And then year 26, we essentially held back 20% of the credits. So that year 26, you do a final quantification that includes measuring a sample of the trees. And then you get essentially a true up or a reconciliation of credits that match the credits that already been issued with what's actually been stored in the trees. We've applied that credit issuance and credit numbers with a price here. So in year 1, you can see we attributed $34 a ton. That's actually what they got. So their revenue before paying our fees was $9,724 in year 1. Year 4, we're projecting $40 a credit. Hard to know, very impossible to predict really, but the supply of credits is being exceeded by the demand for credits right now. And credit prices have gone up quite a bit in the last 2 years. We tried to be conservative and estimate 40 a credit in year 4 and year 6. We have heard that credits will be much higher than that, but we're trying to be conservative on these estimates. In the European Union, credits are now almost $100 a ton. So you can see over time, there's a revenue stream that comes in. We encourage people to think of this as a revenue stream that will help with their maintenance costs, with the total estimated gross revenue being about $157,000 on this. Some places like in Des Moines, Trees Forever, they think of this being an annual project. So the spreadsheet for them would have an annual project with these revenues sort of cascading down each year as projects age through their project duration. So a quick slide on planning opportunities, and then I'll conclude and turn it over to Dan. So one thing to note, trees that are legally required to be planted, it can't be credited. So if there's an ordinance saying, for example, to developers, if you take out trees, you have to plant trees, they can't plant those trees under a legal ordinance and also get credits on them. Ownership, again, always an issue. The ownership has to be confirmed where the trees are planted, and on public land, that's fine. It can be planted on public land. You can have a nonprofit organization be the project operator, provided the public owner gives them the right to receive the credits. And that's in fact what happened in Dan's case, and so he can talk about that too. Planting design, we have different designs really because there are different trees planted in different ways around the country. The single tree, that's more of a street tree or right-of-way planting. We have a cluster method where trees are planted, you know, a little bit apart, like 10 feet apart, but still with a design to create tree canopy. And we think of that in natural areas or in some parks. And then there's area reforestation. So for example, in Austin, Texas, Tree Folks, which is a nonprofit there, they have long planted riparian reforested areas. And the city also is very concerned about water quality, water quantity. Their watersheds department had mapped all the degraded riparian areas. So they're focusing primarily their carbon projects on those riparian reforestation. There's a different quantification method for that because those are not open growing urban trees or what we think of as urban trees like street trees. Those are really dense plantings with high expected mortality. And then the last thing to remember is you have to track trees or canopy growth depending on the type of project. You have to take a sample of the tree at these intervals and you have to check them. You check for mortality at years 4 and 6. You measure DBH of the sample trees, not all of your project trees, but a sample of the trees at 14 and 26. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, but I'm going to leave you with one last thought. We're all anticipating some IRA money coming. I mean, I hope all of you are, and I hope all of you get a bunch of money. My guess is all of that money seems enormous now. By the time it's spread among 50 states and all the various costs of administering that, my guess is that won't seem quite as huge as it is now. But I want to plant a seed, which is that there's no reason in concept that all those IRA funded trees could not be credited. And that would be a wonderful opportunity to, again, provide that long-term accountability and quality to urban forest projects and also generate some maintenance revenue. Okay, having said that, I am now going to pass the mic over to Dan. I'll stop sharing and Dan can tell you what it's like to do an actual project on the ground. Thank you very much.